Hello and welcome to Not a Buffalo, the show where we discuss the science and technology that will save the world. My name is Jack, and I am 2/3 and 1/4. This is Ben, and he's whole.
Good.
How are you,
I'm
Ben?
very well, Jack. How are you? How's it going?
I'm okay. That went okay for an improv, I think.
I think it did. Yeah. Obviously, listeners, we plan out these to the letter, but sometimes we just like to improvise.
Yeah, despite what you may think about the show, it's really tightly scripted.
So, Jack, I have a really exciting news story that I wanted to start this off with, if you'll allow me.
Oh yes, please.
So, have you ever heard of the Voynich manuscript?
Yes, and is this the Turkish phonetic interpretation of it into Latin?
No, this is the fact that a Bristol academic has been the first person to actually crack what it's saying.
Oh, okay. I heard that a bloke cracked it last year.
No, the thing I saw is that...
Oh, this is exciting.
Yeah, so for those who don't know, the Voynich manuscript it's been dated to around the 15th century, and it's basically no one could figure out what it said. It was in an unknown language or code, and a lot of cryptographers and linguistic scholars over the years have tried to figure out what it actually says, and it's named Voynich after... Oh god, I'm going to get his name wrong. It was
the bloke who bought it, wasn't it, in like a market in the 19th or 18th century.
He bought it in 1912, actually. Wilfrid.
That's later than I thought.
Wilfrid Voynich, a Polish Samogitian book dealer, and one of the things that complicated. He made it famous because he was always trying to talk about the clues he'd found as to its as to how to crack the code and essentially figure out what it says, but then a lot of people think that he messed around and made his own notes on it and tried to forge things on it, essentially to build up the fame and the value of it, because I think he spent quite a lot of money on it. But yeah, a Bristol academic has finally cracked the code and figured out what it says, and it's the thing I love about this. So it's the research associate Dr. Gerard Cheshire, and people have been working on this.
What a name!
I know, but people have been working on this for years. And it took him 2 weeks. He said using a combination of lateral thinking and ingenuity to identify the language and writing system of the famously inscrutable document. So he said he just basically had a series of eureka moments, and that's how he managed to figure it out.
So, what does it say?
So it looks like it was compiled by Dominican nuns as a source of reference for Maria of Castile, Queen of Aragon. So the really interesting thing about it is it's basically the first ever written proto-Romance language. So everything was written down in Latin in Europe at the time, as you can expect, because that was the language of the ecclesiarchy and the nobles and everyone. But this is the first one that's kind of, the proto-Romance that led to languages like Portuguese and Spanish and French and Italian and Romanian. And he said it's basically a really interesting... It's an extinct language now, but it's kind of it plays a key part in what a lot of the Romance languages speaking across Europe kind of derive from.
That's really interesting.
I should say he's managed to basically break the code, and he's translated the first few pages, so he's got to finish translating the rest of it now, because there's over 240 pages left. But it's huge, and I've heard quite a lot about the Voynich manuscript over the years, because it's one of these. I think I've heard about it on a couple of other podcasts as well, because it's been one of these big mysteries, because it was it kind of had this sort of fame and notoriety attached to it because of what Wilfrid Voynich was doing, and he was trying to big it up and call it this big mystery. And so a lot of people have spoken about it and wondered what it was, whether it was like secret intelligence from ancient versions of the CIA and MI6, and I think it's apparently a point of reference for the Queen, so it's probably just a list of I don't know, court etiquette or something maybe.
Yeah, I mean it's odd though, because it's divided up into different sections. So like there is a whole section on what looks to be medicine, and one on plant life, and one on animals, and it's got these incredibly odd drawings in it of things which definitely don't exist. Yes. Although that's not to say they're not something that does exist, that's had a bit of artistic interpretation put on top of it, that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. But there's a great picture actually from it, so we'll or maybe we'll link to the article. I think I've actually already tweeted about the article from the account, today,
cool.
because it was I was quite excited when I saw this. It just made me think, God, I follow the weirdest news. That not only is this, I find this really cool, but also that I already knew what the Voynich manuscript was and was really excited by it.
Yeah, I mean, this is right on topic for you and me as well, because
Yeah.
I know, like, I follow the Voynich manuscript stuff as well. Like, that's it, but it is also something that gets solved every couple of years. So I'm quite curious to see how this one plays out.
Is it? I'd heard that people had kind of gotten close to it, or they kind of had ideas for it. But the way this article, anyway, seemed to read is that he's actually figured out the basis of the language and figured out the rules of the language and how the terms work, and maybe why some of the, because they go into a lot of detail about the linguistics on it. They talk about diphthongs, triphthongs, quadriphthongs, and even quintiphthongs, which doesn't mean anything unless you're a linguist.
Yeah, the one I was thinking about when you mentioned this story was a man in Canada who was either of Turkish origin or had Turkish parents, and he spoke Turkish but was also interested in Romance languages. And he found that if you you sounded Turkish words from Old Turkic in and tried to write them down using the Latin alphabet, then you got things which were easily sort of interpretable to the Voynich manuscript.
Oh, okay. I wonder if that suggests that the Turkic languages and the Romance, or the Turkic languages and the Romance languages, had greater influence on each other than we thought, or have a kind of common root that they've drawn from.
Well, his theory was that perhaps someone who was illiterate and grew up in Turkey moved to, say, Venice or somewhere in Italy, and learnt Latin there, or learnt a local language like Italian or something like that, and was then trying to use the words that he knew in Turkish in using the Latin alphabet, but phonetically.
That's interesting. Because I think one of the things that Wilfred Voynich did to try and big up how cool this document was he said he tried to attribute it to Roger Bacon, the famous 14th century or 13th century English writer, naturalist. Yeah. So there's been a lot of questions and theories and conspiracies flying around it in the past, but
it is a beautiful book as well.
It really is. Yeah, we should definitely put a link to some of the images.
I have a feeling there is a digital version online somewhere.
We shall look that up, and if we can link it in the show notes.
Awesome.
But yeah,
okay. Shall we move on to our next story?
Yeah, go ahead. What's your story for us? What's your highlight of the last couple of weeks?
My highlight is the NASA. I don't know if it really counts as news, but NASA have brought forward their moon base landing. I think they've had a heavy dose of Elon Musk, essentially, is what's happened. So they've basically gone, we're going to set up a moon base, and we're going there to stay for 2024. Which, for those of you who aren't following the calendar, is like 5 years' time, which is not a very long time.
Especially not for a moon mission, no. I mean, I know we've been there before, but we'd do it completely differently now, wouldn't we?
I guess. I mean, you'd still be using chemical rockets. Like, you'd still be using some kind of capsule. But they've got, like, part of this is you've probably seen the Orion capsule. That sort of has been cropping up over the last year and a half, maybe a bit more than that. It's a reusable capsule that NASA have developed for long-distance space travel and various other things. It's very flexible. But and this was the big thing that I didn't know about, although maybe I've just not been following NASA news close enough, but they're going to build something like the International Space Station that's going to orbit the moon.
That's quite cool.
So they're calling it the Gateway, or the Lunar Orbital Platform Gateway, but most people just refer to it as Gateway. And the idea is it's going to be a solar-powered communications hub, a science lab, and also have some habitation modules, so you're not sort of stuck on the surface of the moon.
Okay.
And you can kind of pick where to land on the moon, so you're not stuck on there because of your trajectory. So like if you're approaching the moon and you're just slowing down, you don't have a whole lot of control over where you land without a lot of planning. you kind of have to just pick out a landing spot. That's what they did on the Apollo missions. Is they just tried to land on the right spot. But this would give them a lot more control over where they land. They could do multiple missions up and down, and mostly live either on the moon or even up on Gateway. I think I read somewhere that it's going to be able to change orbit, so it can move into higher and lower orbits around the moon, which is really cool. I don't think there's ever been a space station that can actually do that. The International Space Station has like a little bit of oomph, but that's mainly just to stop its orbit completely decaying. But I think that's a really cool story, is that NASA have just gone, yeah, well, it took us 10 years to get there the first time, so maybe 5 years we can do it this time.
Yeah. I mean, this is a really cool story, but I kind of want to put another proposal forward for this, because I have a feeling that NASA have been going to Trump and saying, so climate change is a big issue, and we've got all this data and all this information on climate change, and he's just going, look, if you're going to keep talking about climate change, I'm not going to fund you guys because I don't like climate change. And so they've just gone, okay, fine, give us $1.64 billion and we'll go to the moon. You can understand it. We're going to stop talking about geoengineering and climate action. Just give us some money and we'll go back to the moon. You remember, like Kennedy? We'll just do that instead.
Yeah, that's a possibility. I mean, their official line is that they're using it as a stepping stone to Mars.
Okay.
Yeah, so they're going to sort of get set up on the moon, start using the resource. Their plan is actually to mine local resources and use stuff that's on the moon. Maybe do some 3D printing with it or something like that.
Okay.
Which is really cool.
What are the resources on the moon? Because moon rock is made up of some unusual stuff, isn't it? Or it has iron and certain useful resources inside it, does it?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the big one is helium-3.
Oh, of course, yes.
But I don't know. Good luck printing stuff with helium-3. Everything will just squeak along.
They're just gonna float to Mars. They're just
it's balloon travel.
Yes.
That's really what we're aiming for.
But yeah, no, that is a really cool story, and I think because it's the 50th anniversary, isn't it, of the moon landing this year, or even this month, I think.
I thought it would really only
no
50?
60. What year is it? It was 69, wasn't it? So it's is it the 60-year anniversary this year?
Maybe.
No, it is. It is 50.
Wow.
It is 50 years since the moon landing. Yes, because 40 years would take us to 2009.
No, it's
yes,
not. It's 60.
No. 2019. So yeah, 2009 would be 40 years, so 2019 is 50 years.
Oh, okay. No. Sorry, that's uncrewed.
Ah,
yeah,
okay.
My bad. Uncrewed is 59.
And then
which was a Soviet lander.
And then it was.
And July 69 was Apollo 11.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So the first human landing on the moon. Yes, that's right. So 60 years since we landed on the moon, 50 years since we landed a human on the moon.
Wow. So this is a good year for the moon buffs.
Yes. And then we're going back, just in case we forgot something. But it's one of those things. I think if there's one thing I could go back, there's probably a lot of things I'd like to do actually if I could get a time machine and go back and observe something in history. But going back and watching the people first land on the moon, I think would definitely be up there, because I could just imagine the atmosphere around the entire world watching it was just so incredible, and seeing that kind of achievement, it's something that, they didn't even have the computing equivalent of an iPhone 6, and they managed to get someone to the moon.
Yeah, or a pocket calculator.
Yeah, exactly. Is that right? Pocket calculators now have more computing power than they had.
Yeah, it would have been about the whole of the NASA operation was done on about the power you have in a pocket calculator.
Wow.
But it was entirely orientated around doing calculations. I believe Fortran was their language of choice for the computer they had at the time.
Okay.
But I'm not sure if I'm getting that right. That might have been earlier. That might have been the Mercury missions.
Who was the Margaret Hamilton? That's who I want to give a shout out to. Margaret Hamilton, the computer scientist who did all of the programming to enable them to land on the moon. She developed all the onboard flight software for the Apollo space program. So shout out to her, because she's an incredible woman, and I just always like to bring that up when we talk about the moon landing. And also Katherine Johnson, another incredible female mathematician who, I think, did you watch that film Hidden Figures?
Yeah, that was a good film. Yeah, that was a really good film.
Yeah, and there was a genuine true point in that where the astronaut, it wasn't for the moon landing, it was for an earlier mission. It was the first American to go into orbit around the Earth, I think. And he refused to trust anyone else except Katherine Johnson. He said, get her to double check the figures. I think they'd had their first computer run the figures, and he said, don't care, get Katherine to check the figures, because I'm only going to get on that rocket if she's checked them. And she did, and she was right. And he got up and came back down safely. So yeah, shout out to those two.
It says a lot about like how little we've moved on in trusting machines,
yes.
And also how much we've moved on in trusting machines.
Anyway, yeah, fantastic story, and I'm just trying desperately now to find a segue into the next story, and I can't do it. I'm so sorry.
I don't know, Ben. I have faith in you. I think you could segue between anything and anything.
Well,
you're really good at it.
Well, you know how there's all that water on the moon, but it's kind of unusable because it's too salinated. There's too much salt in it.
And how bacon is salty.
Actually, okay.
And how Bacon may have written the Voynich manuscript.
No, but if we're going to talk about Bacon, I'll move on to that story instead. I was angling for a different story, but you brought up Bacon now.
How do you have a Bacon story?
I have a story for everything. So this story struck my headline, or struck my eye, because the headline is "Fake meat. Don't go bacon my heart," say butchers.
Oh, I love it. That's wonderful. I don't really care about the story, but "Don't go bacon my heart" is now that's going on my playlist. That's so good.
But this story is fantastic because it's basically they went along. There's a butchers' convention in Frankfurt in Germany, because of course there is. Where else?
Of course there is.
Where else would you have a meat convention? And but a lot of.
Do you think they saw the irony in going, "We're going to do it in Frankfurt"? Oh, should we do it in Hamburg? No, Frankfurt. They're more like meat. Like.
Yeah, very possibly. But actually, the story is essentially about a lot of plant-based meat alternatives that are meant to look and bleed like actual meat does are coming onto the market, and they've actually started appearing at this butcher's convention. And the stories are great because there's just loads of French, and they interviewed a load of French and German butchers at the convention saying, so what do you think of these new like vegan burger startups, Beyond Meat, and these places creating vegan sausages and steaks that can actually bleed? And they're just really angry about it. There's a quote from Paolo Desbois, an 18-year-old French butcher, who says, as a butcher, it just can't be that we have to get into plastic, because he thinks synthetic burgers are just plastic.
That's so good.
And then it says, puzzlingly for the butchers, the fake meat seems to be popular. They just can't understand it.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Although see, part of me now wants all conventions for anything to be held in like a city which has a pun around it. So now I want all firefighter conventions to be held in Switzerland, Bern.
And then the oh no, I can't.
Please have another pun.
You put me under pressure here. I don't know. Oh, you could have wedding conventions in Much Wenlock in Shropshire.
That'll do. That's nice. That's PG.
And I imagine the Satanists have their convention in Hell, which I think is in Minnesota, or maybe it's in Alaska.
I mean, you've got to have a sense of humour to name a town that far north. Hell.
Sorry, it's in Michigan.
Oh, that makes perfect sense.
I know nothing about Michigan.
I've never been to Michigan. I don't know anything about Michigan. I know Kid Rock is from there.
Is he?
I know that they refer to Lake Michigan as the third coast of America because it's just a very large body of water.
Oh, yes, Lake Michigan. Yeah, makes sense.
I have a vague feeling that the Chicago River flows out of Lake Michigan because they reversed it with dynamite.
How do you reverse a river with dynamite?
Oh, you have a lot of dynamite. Is the simple answer.
Okay.
They blasted for like I think it was multiple years. It was certainly like more than 1 year. The problem was the river had become so polluted that it was catching fire regularly.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, right.
Speaking of catching fire, did you see Bill Nye on Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, where he just set the globe on fire because he was just like done with it?
No, I didn't.
It was so funny because they basically just went, we broke Bill Nye. He's so sick of people not listening to climate change and climate action that he set a globe on fire to demonstrate his point, and it's brilliant. If you've not watched it yet, I'd highly recommend it.
I'll have a look at that. That sounds awesome.
And also, the reason I heard about the town of Hell in Michigan is that it freezed over in January when the USA had their cold snap, their polar vortex. So Hell literally froze over.
Wow. That's awesome. Yeah.
So if that's not a metaphor for what's going to happen because of climate change, then I don't know what is.
So
anyway, butchers are scared of... Well, not scared. They're annoyed by the fake meat coming into the world, but
they're furious.
As we've already mentioned several times on this podcast, in this episode alone, it's probably a good idea to cut down on meat a little bit. Actually, they did conclude the article on a positive note, because they did say actually it could be good for butchers, because what they're saying, they're not saying to stop eating meat, they're saying stop eating inferior quality meat from the supermarket and things, go to a properly trained butcher, get good quality meat, pay that little bit extra, and just do it less often. And actually really enjoy the meat you're having and fill the rest of your diet with plant alternatives, because that will be better for the planet and better for your health.
And lentils are awesome.
Lentils are awesome.
I love
my
lentils.
girlfriend actually makes a really good dal. I know you know who it is.
Oh,
really nice dal. She's very good at it. So
yeah.
we've got a few recipes of that. It's really nice.
Yes. So this is the story that Microsoft are going to be blowing the minds of anyone who works in the Linux community by actually supplying Linux with a new release of Windows. Like, they're going to be shipping a Linux kernel, and the kernel will be regularly updated with Windows updates, which is, I mean, from my point of view, that's mind-blowing.
So why do computer scientists and programmers, why do they like using Linux? Considering it's the basis, or a kernel of it is the basis for things like Google Android and the operating system on the phones. Is that right?
Yeah, Android is a Linux system. Actually, the Apple OS is based on a Linux kernel.
Okay.
Part of the reason that Linux got popular back in the day is that it's always been open source, right from the word go. Whereas, of course, you often can't get at the Apple core functions and the Apple's core operating system, and you can often not get at Windows core operating system stuff. Although Windows did recently open source a load of their stuff.
Okay.
Like last year, a load of their C stuff, which is really cool. But the reason developers like Linux is it lets you get at stuff which you can't get at on a lot of operating systems.
Wow. Well,
so
speaking of speeding up processes, how much do you know about salination? Or desalination, I should say.
I mean, I know it's taking salt out of water, or water out of salt, depending on how you want to look at it.
Exactly.
I think, isn't it to make seawater drinkable, effectively?
Yes, essentially. And at the moment, it's mainly done through reverse osmosis. So countries that have a lot of desert and not a lot of rivers, places like Saudi Arabia, for example, and the United Arab Emirates, and places, Israel as well, I think, they all use desalination plants. But at the moment, as I said, the gold standard is kind of reverse osmosis, which is really quite expensive and quite time-consuming. You can also do it by distillation, but that's quite time-consuming, requires a lot of energy. And they found that they're not very good at getting the salt out of what they call hypersaline brines, which is water that contains a lot of salt, unsurprisingly, and is generally created by things like oil and gas production. So they end up creating a lot of really, really salty water. But, and this is a really good news story, I think, and something really hopeful, particularly when we have been talking about climate change, a Columbia engineering team led by Ngai Yin Yip, apologies if I pronounce your name incorrectly, who's an assistant professor of earth and environmental engineering, have developed a radically different desalination process, which they call temperature swing solvent extraction, TSSE. And it's basically a really interesting process. I'm not going to go into all the details.
So is it rapid heating and cooling or something like
No,
that?
so
'Cause temperature swing makes
it's
me
actually
think.
a solvent extraction. Is the way they do it. So they basically,
Oh.
and it's fairly, like, compared to reverse osmosis and distillation especially, it's actually relatively inexpensive. It's fairly simple, and they use it as a good separation technique, and they found it's much more effective, or it's still effective even on hypersaline brine, so there is a huge amount of salt, and it can be done at a fairly low temperature, so below 70 degrees centigrade, which means that's often inexpensive, and particularly when you're talking about desert countries, you can actually probably just put up a big magnifying glass and heat up the water to that temperature for free. So
Yeah.
it's really good news, because it will give potentially it will make desalination plants on a large scale much more feasible for a lot cheaper. So that's much better for a lot of poor countries that suffer from drought, particularly countries in Africa, and as climate change continues, probably places even California could probably use this at this point, given that I think the drought is officially over, but we're coming into summer again, and it's probably not looking good for them again this year. So yeah,
I'm just wondering how available the solvent they're using is. So which solvent are they using?
so I don't think they actually say. TSSE utilizes a low polarity solvent with temperature dependent water solubility for the selective extraction of water over salt from saline feeds. So they don't actually say what the solvent
so
is.
it'll only operate at a relatively low temperature. I
Yes,
guess.
exactly. Yes. So basically, the positive to take away from it though is it's more effective and it's cheaper than the current methods, which I think there would be some work to scale it up.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I think there would be some work to actually scale it up to the size that they have now in existing desalination plants, like they have in the Middle East and other places. But that it seems like there'd be, that it would definitely be feasible to do that, and yeah, it could be a really positive development going forward.
Cool. That's really
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's all the stories I had today, really. Is there anything else that you wanted to mention, Jack?
No, that's all my stories.
Yeah.
All of my stories.
Well, I think that was a really positive note to finish on, and great to talk to you as always. Well, thank you everyone very much for listening. Please subscribe to the show to never miss an episode, and rate and review us wherever you have the power to do so. We're on Google Podcasts, we're on Apple Podcasts, we're on Spotify. You can get our RSS feed as well, and we'll be on Podcast Addict if you want to look there. If you'd like to get in touch, we are at Not a Buffalo Pod on Twitter. We are Not a Buffalo Podcast on Facebook, and you can contact us through our website, notabuffalo.wordpress.com. Take care.